Sure, thanks very much. Let's see if the thing magically appears. It does. Now, I noticed on the last handout we were just given, I was looking hard for global warming somewhere between dowsing and the Loch Ness Monster, and I didn't find it anywhere, so we might need to add global warming to the list of silly things. In any case, I was asked to, I'm a professor at the University of Buffalo, and I'm a geologist, and I'm a climate scientist, full disclosure. So I was asked to talk about global warming, since a lot of people are skeptical about global warming, and there's doubt involved also. The asterisk, which I've added to my talk, relates to the second slide, which is global warming really isn't a hoax, although there are many people that promote this. Is Ted Cruz here? I hear he's coming, yeah. So this is what Senator Cruz has to say about climate change or global warming. He says the scientific evidence doesn't support global warming. Did anyone hear the NPR interview with Ted Cruz a couple of months back? It was alarming for me to hear that. In any case, he quickly pointed out in that interview also that he was the son of two mathematicians and computer programmers and scientists. So he ought to know what he's talking about when it comes to climate change, I suppose. What I thought I would do tonight is talk about some of the main reasons, top 3 reasons anyway, on many websites in terms of why global warming isn't actually happening, and tell you a little bit about those reasons. One of the reasons of the 3 is not solar variability. We can talk about that also, but that's another common one. So the first reason is that there hasn't been any warming since 1997, and this is what Senator Cruz was pointing to when he said that there's no scientific data to support global warming. He was focusing on this interval. So let me tell you a little bit about this interval. This is the temperature. I'll try not to get too sciencey, but there's going to be some science in here. There's going to be some graphs. So this is the first graph, and it's a graph of the temperature of the whole Earth in historical times, when people have been on the planet recording temperature from the oceans and the lands and the continents all the way around the globe, and it shows what's well accepted and it's repeatable by many scientific agencies in different nations around the world. And it shows the not always perfectly steadily linear rise of temperature, but overall there's some ups and downs, but overall the temperature of the planet has been going up in this last 140-year period, and this is what's referred to as global warming. Now, if you chop off the first part, and let's chop off the last couple of years. So it turns out the last 2 years have been the warmest ever on record, but let's just for argument's sake take those away. What you're left with is something that people argue you could put a line through like that, which doesn't show warming or cooling, but it's relatively straight with not much change. And this is what Ted Cruz is pointing to when he says that there's no scientific evidence to support global warming. And a lot of people call on this interval, this recent decade or so, where there hasn't been substantial increase in global warming, even though global warming's been all over the press, to suggest that there's no scientific data to support it. Now, it turns out if you shift further back in time to maybe a zone centered around 1990, you could draw the same conclusion. Around 1980, you could draw the same conclusion. In the 50s and 60s, you could draw the same conclusion. And stretching back to the early part of the last century, you could draw the same conclusion. And when you put that all together, obviously, there's no denying that the planet's been warming, yet people still claim that. And so there's those small little perturbations on the overall trend of increasing temperature. Now, why is it warming? Scientists agree that it's warming largely, not entirely, but largely because of greenhouse gases that humans are emitting due to their using fossil fuels to create energy. And so this is a very famous plot of CO2, one of the main greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, that's increasing from the late 1950s up until present day. And these data are obtained by simply collecting air samples far away from factories and things like that. In fact, these samples are collected from the middle of the Pacific Ocean on the top of a tropical volcano that we call Hawaii, on the Big Island. And when they're far removed from industrial sources, they show this more or less steady rise. There's an annual oscillation here, but it's going up and up and up and up, like so. So the next thing that climate scientists really want to know, so this really led to people hypothesizing that this increase of this CO2 in the atmosphere is leading to global warming, or it should soon if it's not yet. And this regards the Earth's greenhouse effect and the role that greenhouse gases play in modulating Earth's surface temperature. Now, what climate scientists want to know is this part of some natural cycle? We know that climate changes in the past. Has CO2 been this high in the past? And we're pretty sure this is humans, but are there other times when CO2's been higher? And so to put this recent rise of CO2 in context, scientists do this cool thing where they look into the Earth's past. And the photograph here shows a site on the summit of the Greenland ice sheet. The Greenland ice sheet is a giant pile of ice. It's 2 miles thick. So the top of it is over 10,000 feet above sea level on the island of Greenland. So the island is smothered in this big slab of ice that's grown there in the last couple 100,000 years in Earth's history. And it turns out that inside that black ball is a coring system that can take a core about as fat as a 2-liter bottle, and it can drill that ice sheet, that's those 2 miles, all the way down to the bedrock that's the island base down there around sea level. And in that core, that long tube of ice they extract from the ice sheet, they can crush up old ice that's 10,000 years old or 200 years old. They can crush that ice up and release the gas that was preserved that dates to those older time periods. This is what one of the ice cores looks like at a different site. Basically what you would imagine, it's basically a long straw that's ice, and you can pull that up from great depths below the surface that you're standing on, and that's what scientists call ice cores. And this is another graph that shows the same thing I showed earlier, CO2, except what I've done is I've extended the axis on the bottom to represent more time. So this plot goes back to 1,000 years ago, back to medieval times. And the more recent decades are on the right side of the plot, and the older decades are on the left side of the plot. And you can see that these CO2 measurements show that normal conditions in the past 1,000 years are close to 280 ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere. And in recent times, it's been going up and up and up and up. And that's basically due to what we call the Industrial Revolution. This is our thirst for fossil fuel-based energy. Now, ice cores, in fact, go back more than 1,000 years ago. Anyone here know how old the oldest ice is on Earth? Any guesses? 300,000? Turns out almost 1 million years. And that's found at the base of the Antarctic ice sheet, which is the Earth's second ice sheet. We have two. One's Greenland and one's Antarctica, and Antarctica sits over the South Pole, of course. The ice is a little bit thicker down there and it accumulates more slowly, and it turns out the base of the Antarctic ice sheet is close to 1 million years old. If we look at just the uppermost 400,000 years, so this is almost 500,000 years of ice, we can see this is also CO2, and I've extended the axis even further back. We can see that actually the Earth has a natural oscillation of CO2 back and forth, up and down. And the range here is between a couple hundred ppm up to almost 300 ppm. And it turns out this is our current level. So we can see that in the last 200 years, CO2 has gone up again as much as the entire natural range before humans did anything with fossil fuels. And in fact, just this month, the reports have come out that we've crossed 400 ppm CO2, and we're currently at something like 404.8. This is statistic I found on the web recently.
Do we know what those oscillations are caused by?
These oscillations are quite well understood. In fact, anyone know what modulates CO2 like this in natural timescales without human interference?
Volcanoes.
Aliens, exactly. That's the answer I was looking for. The other idea is that it relates to the way the Earth orbits the sun. So it turns out that changes. You know how we're tilted a little bit on our axis, and that's why we have seasons and stuff like that, and we go around the sun, of course. At least that's one of the theories. And and it turns out that as our orbital parameters change as we cycle around the sun, that gives rise to more and less energy on the Earth in this sort of oscillatory manner, and that has some feedback processes that either release or store CO2 on the planet. So this is the natural carbon cycle in terms of CO2. People think they understand that in terms of orbital cyclicity. Okay, 404.8 ppm. Now how about the future? Of course, you're probably worried about the future. We're all worried about the future. This is another plot of CO2, this one projected into the future. So the left side of this plot at the bottom now is roughly where we are today. The right side of the plot is 2100 AD. Okay, so 85 years into the future. Now, in order for us to know how hot the Earth is going to be in the future, we need to have some good estimates or projections of CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's what this plot shows. This is the world scientists coming together to have some projections of what CO2 might be in the future. The red curve on top is what's referred to as business as usual. So this is what's going to happen to CO2 if we don't have any sort of massive global scale slowdown of our carbon emissions into the atmosphere. The green line on the bottom is the other end member scenario. And this one says that, okay, as of right now, let's say everybody agrees to the Paris Agreement that happened at the end of last year. We're not only going to have zero net emissions of CO2 in the atmosphere, but we're also going to have some successful geoengineering techniques to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. Turns out the CO2 has a residence time of about 100 years in the atmosphere. So if we didn't pull any out, we're already committed or guaranteed to a certain amount of CO2 rise in the atmosphere and therefore warming. That's called warming that people say is in the pipeline already that we've committed to. Unless we have some geoengineering and we can figure out how to pull the carbon out of the atmosphere and put it in the ground or in the ocean or ship it off into space or whatever. And then there's a couple of scenarios in between. Now let's look at what planet Earth might feel like according to these two end member scenarios. The next plot I'm going to show are actually maps. The left one is that green scenario. This is if we're super successful at coming together as a world, and on top of that, not only having net zero emissions, but pulling it out of the atmosphere. We're looking at a planet that's not that different than today. A couple of degrees, 1.5 degree. In contrast, on the right, the business as usual globe is going to feel hot. So this is, we're looking at maybe 5 to 7 to 9 degrees warmer. You can see that there is some spatial heterogeneity of the warming. It's a lot warmer in the Arctic, for example. And there are some good reasons that we think we understand that. 2100 is not that far in the future, of course, that we all have relatives in our families that were born 85 years ago in the past. This is only 85 years in the future. So this is some pretty dramatic change that we'll be facing here. Now I have one slide to show you about what I do. So I do a lot of research where I reconstruct how big glaciers are through time. When glaciers grow in the past during the ice ages, for example, or when they shrink during planetary warm times. And I'm showing you a couple of pictures from Greenland where I do a lot of work with my students at UB. And these photographs show the evidence that the ice on Greenland is shrinking. So in particular, the bottom left picture, it's easier to see. There's this big stripe on the mountainside. And this is a bathtub ring that says how thick the ice used to be in very recent times, probably 100 years ago. So the evidence that the ice is thinning up there is really in your face. Anybody could go there and see this kind of change. Now, what's the consequence of melting ice? Sea level. So here's the graph from 1700 year AD up to today of actually projected into the future also of global sea level change. So all the data points from here and to the left are actual data. That's the history of sea level change in the global ocean. And you can see starting maybe in the late 1800s, it began to rise and we've risen maybe 20 or 30 centimeters or something like that so far. And then the red curve and the blue curve, those projections are sea level rise projections that are linked to those scenarios I showed earlier about the business as usual versus geoengineering successful. So we're committed to either a couple of feet of sea level rise or maybe 3 feet of sea level rise by 2100 AD. So that's what the latest predictions are going to be. So we're looking at 2 to 3 feet of sea level rise expected in the near term. So this is all pretty well understood stuff. It doesn't stop some people, obviously, from not believing it. So Donald Trump has he's received many environmental awards. He believes in weather, not climate. Donald Trump's not here either, is he? Isn't he coming to town soon? Monday. All right, hooray. It's a big scam for a lot of people to make a lot of money. I can't tell you how much money I make for being a climate scientist. It's a lot. Okay, moving on to reason number 2. There's no scientific consensus that global warming is occurring and that it's caused by man. This largely stems or relates to this petition that was organized maybe 10 years ago or so, where a couple of, I would say maybe fringe scientists put together a little petition that said something like, we don't, it relates back to the 1990s when there was this Kyoto Protocol to curb CO2 emissions. People thought that was really horrible, and so they wanted to seek scientists to sign a petition that said that basically they don't believe in man-made climate change and that the planet is warming. And the petition was sent around. I got a copy of it. I did not sign it, but I got a copy of it. All of my colleagues got a copy of it. All the scientists, as far as I know, many scientists across the nation in the US got copies of this thing. And it says that 31,000 American scientists have signed this petition, including 9,000 of them with PhDs. Now I'm reading this awesome handout we just got. And it also says on here, experts in one field may not be experts in another. I have nothing against physics, by the way. It says, watch out for the PhD in chemistry who is cited for his or her authority in spiritual healing. And so that was the aim of this petition. There were a lot of MDs, for example, that signed this thing to say that global warming wasn't happening, hence the claim that all these scientists disagree with global warming.
Is that the Edward Teller?
That might be the Edward Teller.
I believe it is, yeah. Freeman Dyson signed that too.
There are several really big names of people who signed this. In fact, the person who sent it out, the sort of highest ranking guy that they could figure out to get on this thing and send it out was somebody who had been formerly the president of the National Academy of Sciences and who had turned into a non-believer of climate change. And so that led to this statement like this. I found this on the World Wide Web. Turns out you can find a lot of amazing things on the World Wide Web. So 12 out of 13 scientists agree. This is something else you can find on the World Wide Web. You can see humans and dinosaurs coexisting. I think this relates to the guy, that New Orleans guy, that Jindal guy. Turns out you could also find things like this on the World Wide Web, which is pretty heartwarming, actually. So that happened, right? Didn't it happen?
Next year.
Next year, that's coming. So, but actually you can find some reputable evidence to try to get an understanding of what is the current consensus of scientists and the public in terms of their belief or support for climate change, for global warming. This is one particular study where they looked at peer-reviewed literature, published literature, and they found that between 1991 and 2012, when they looked at just climate articles in online searches for peer-reviewed stuff, they see that not many reject global warming, and that by far the majority support the evidence for global warming. This is another study that I stumbled upon that's just 2013, almost 11,000 peer-reviewed climate articles, only 2 of which reject that humans have some kind of influence on global warming. So regardless of what you might read or see on the internet, there is a very strong scientific consensus. This is one of my favorite plots to show. The question is this: do you think that human activity is a significant contributing factor in global warming? Now, what these pollsters did was that they polled the general public with this question, and then a series of groups of people that are increasingly more and more familiar with climate science. And you can see that the percentage of people who say yes increases with the familiarity of the actual topic. This is maybe, perhaps, this is maybe 10 years old now. I wish I could find something like this that exists today, but you can see then the general public is maybe between 50 and 60% in terms of a yes. One other way to look at this is from the IPCC. This is the international body of scientists that writes these reports. We're up to the 5th report, so they're sort of the Earth's climate doctor team. And they have these reports that they put out. And it turns out this human thing that's filling up with water or blue color is indicating the certainty with which the IPCC attributes climate change to human influence. And in the very first report in 1990, they didn't even touch that topic. And then in 95, 2001, 2007, 2013, in 2013, they used the words extremely likely, which in the report they actually defined as meaning something, and that is greater than a 95% chance that humans are responsible for more than half of Earth's temperature increase since 1951. So they kind of are held accountable to some pretty rigid terminology there. So in any case, there's clearly a scientific consensus. That, by the way, is pretty high. If we poll the public, I just actually recently stumbled upon the Gallup Poll you always heard. If you ever looked at the Gallup Poll website, it's pretty awesome. They post all these polls there. This is one I found that says U.S. views about when effects of global warming will occur. And you can see that more than in recent times, I guess this spans a decade or two, in recent times people are over 50% acknowledging that global warming's already begun. That's good. Another percent say it will happen, and then there's this percentage that says it will never happen. That percentage is lower than 20%. This plot has a different question. It says, do you think cigarette smoking is one of the causes of lung cancer or not? And the next question is, do you think cigarette smoking is the cause of heart disease or not? And you can see that actually the general public, even today, I guess maybe it goes up to 2012 or 13 or something like that, 20% of the public in our country do not think that heart disease relates to cigarette smoking. I'm going to go back one slide. That's more people than think that global warming will never happen. Okay, third reason, Arctic ice is up 50% since 2012. This is great. World Wide Web's a great place to be sometimes. Man-made global warming hoax exposed. Arctic ice sheet increased by 920,000 square miles in 1 year. Isn't that incredible? And then they show a couple of panels of actually what we call Arctic sea ice, not an ice sheet. It's a very thin film of ice that mantles the Arctic Ocean, much like how our puddles freeze in the winter and they're covered with ice. I like how they had the IPCC logo on the bottom as if it's endorsed by the IPCC. Gotta love the web.
Jason, who are extremely pissed off right-wingers won?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I've yet to browse the Facebook page. Or 3 or 4. We might have to add one ourselves, I think. This is sea ice. Like I just explained, sea ice is not a 2-mile thick ice sheet like I talked about earlier in terms of Greenland. Sea ice is the very thin veneer of ice that freezes usually seasonally even on top of the Arctic Ocean surface. This is a weird plot, but it's kind of cool once you get tuned to it. The bottom axis is 1 year. And this plot shows the increase of sea ice aerial coverage in the winter, the decrease of sea ice aerial coverage in the summer, and then it's starting to grow again in the fall back to the winter. And each one of these lines is a year. So day one of some year, this year, for example, it's growing until maybe March, where it peaks. And then during the melt season, it melts and melts and melts and melts and melts. And anyone know when during the year sea ice is at its minimum in the northern hemisphere? Anyone trying to do the math real quick? Turns out it's in September because it's at the end of the summer melt season. That's when it's smallest. And then when the fall gets cold again and it starts to grow again. And that's what this thing shows. Now what I wanted to show here is the people who put this plot together color-coded time. So the oldest years are the blue colors. The warmest years are the red colors, the pink colors. Let me just point that out. So you might see the blue colors are all up here, and the pinker and redder colors are down here in the bottom. This year is in yellow. So you can see 2016, we're kind of down there in terms of the overall sea ice extent compared to historical data going farther back in time. Right, so pretty soon we might be facing an Arctic in the summertime which is completely ice-free. This, of course, is of great interest to people who want to have shipping lanes across the Arctic Ocean basin, who want to explore the Arctic Ocean for oil reserves and things like this. I'm going to come back to that. If you just plot the September sea ice extent, so for example, if you just took a line through here and plotted the data points for how small in aerial extent the sea ice got in September, you would come up with a plot like this, going from the late 1970s up until today. And so the notion that Arctic sea ice increased in one single year by 920,000 square kilometers is simply 2 points. So as scientists, we all know, we all love the 2 points, right? 2 points is all you need. But if you look at the broader picture, you can see the longer term trend here. Moving on to sea ice thickness, the real thing that's concerning about sea ice actually is that we used to have thick sea ice. There's some sea ice that grows year after year after year and becomes like what's called maybe 5-year sea ice or 6-year sea ice, and that gets quite thick. And that's something that we kind of bank on hanging around in the system to keep the sea ice pack there. And this is a plot on the left that's sort of an average condition. On the right is a 2008 time slice. So we're losing our thick sea ice. And this is a plot. On this one, this is the last few decades. Now I just want you to focus on the white part in the bottom. The white part in the bottom is the amount of 5-year plus old sea ice. And you can see that the thick sea ice, the 5-year-old sea ice, is declining. So pretty soon the Arctic Ocean is just going to be a seasonal sea ice cover, and we're going to lose our thicker ice, and that's going to really hurt its ability to kind of regrow every season and do the important things that sea ice does to the Earth's temperature. It helps keep the planet cool, turns out. Okay, so why are people like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump and many, many Americans skeptical? And is it willful denial? So I like this cartoon from Calvin and Hobbes that says, it's not denial, I'm just very selective about the reality I accept. And I think that's what's going on in a lot of cases. This is, I'm going to show you a couple of quotes from American Petroleum Institute's 1998 memo that presents a roadmap for climate deception. This was a leaked report that came out some time ago, and they say that victory will be achieved when average citizens understand/recognize uncertainties in climate science, and that recognition of those uncertainties becomes part of the conventional wisdom. So focusing on the uncertainty, not what's known. Further down in the document, one of the next bullet points for victory will be achieved when those promoting the Kyoto Treaty, this was the 1990s treaty that tried to get the world to limit greenhouse gas emissions, when those promoting the Kyoto Treaty on the basis of extant science appeared to be out of touch with reality. That was their attempt. You may have seen something in the news last fall, and was a story broken by the LA Times that says what Exxon knew about the Earth's melting Arctic. Now, it turns out that a lot of oil companies have been extracting oil in the Arctic Ocean basin, Prudhoe Bay, northern Alaska, and they pipe the oil across Alaska to Valdez, and they get it in the tanker, and they bring it down to Texas, and then they refine it. So Exxon, for example, had scientists that were not only aware of climate change, but they were very interested in what was going to happen to the Arctic. And they knew that as the Arctic Ocean sea ice pack was decreasing, that they could increase the terrain in which they could drill for oil. So they were very well aware of global warming and what it was doing to the planet. Yet at the same time, ExxonMobil was having basically a smear campaign of scientists and funding things like the Heartland Institute and entities that were trying to promote climate change denial. Obviously, there's some political agenda going on with the denial related to global warming. Another Gallup poll, Americans believe 2050 was record warm, but split on why. And there's no surprise here. There's a big difference between registered Republicans and Democrats. So Republicans, 27%. Don't attribute this warm year to man-made climate change, whereas the majority of Democrats do. Getting down towards the end here, I want to close with something that is relatively concerning, and one example of this came out last fall, and it's continuing today. It relates to this particular paper that was published in the journal Science, which is sort of one of the top-tier scientific journals, highly regarded, peer-reviewed stuff. And some NOAA scientists submitted an article that got published in Science. It got peer-reviewed, and they corrected the way in which we derive the global mean temperature for any given year. A lot of those data come from ocean buoys, and there's a lot of corrections that need to be made in terms of how you spatially apply the temperature from all these specific sites around the world. And they had a paper that said, okay, we've revised our statistical treatment, or we maybe found some errors in our data before, and we come up with a new correction that leads to a new global temperature curve. And you can't see much of a difference here, right? There's like the old correction, which is red, and there's a new correction, which is gray, or something like that. What this new correction did actually was it changed this 17-year period, so-called 17-year period in the last decade or so, last 15 years before the last couple of years anyway. And it made it not as flat, right? So it made this flat global warming period through the 2000s not quite so flat. And this then took away the current politicians' main key argument against global warming, and that is that we actually maybe did have global warming through that interval. And so people in powerful positions, this is House Representatives Lamar Smith, he's a congressman from Texas. He's the chairman, I don't know how this ever came to be, but he's the chairman of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. And so what he did was he basically abused his authority, and he subpoenaed basically all of NOAA. There was some back and forth. He first subpoenaed the authors, and then after some back and forth, maybe several months later, he basically subpoenaed all scientists and non-scientists at NOAA, trying to get all their emails. You guys remember, like, what was it called? Email Gate or whatever, that thing that happened? So they're fishing to find some people just like going off an email about some random thing, or their night last night or whatever, which we all do on email. And so he's trying to get all those emails so he can look for something to discredit the science. Really bad stuff. This is what I started with, this quote from Ted Cruz, and I want to show you what he said next in this with this interview with Steve Inskeep and David Green at NPR. So he said this part: scientific evidence doesn't support global warming. You know what he said next? I believe that public policy should follow the science and follow the data. Now, if he really knew what the data were, I'm sure he knows. He's not, probably we all would like to think he's an idiot, but he's not an idiot. So certainly there's some willful denial and some political agenda here. Okay, closing slide. So the Earth's temperature is warming. this now we maybe don't want to deny too much, but there are some things that would be good to be in denial about. And that is the beer truck spilling over and losing all of our beer. We like beer. The Bills losing 4 Super Bowls. So these are things that we would be happy to just put on a smiley face and kind of forget about. Anyway, thank you.